KoitCast.
Hi Nick, hi Sarah, welcome to KoitCast.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Paul, again.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Nick, for the second time, and meeting you, Sarah, for the first time. So thank you for coming. Much appreciated. Right, and we're here today to talk about a fascinating area for me, which is the Scole Experiments. And I know both of you were present at the experiments. So I wanted to dig deeper on it. So could I start with you, either or both, Nick or Sarah, just telling us what the Scole Experiments were, when did they take place, then how did you get involved, that sort of thing.
Shall I lead off on that, Dave?
I think so.
The Scole Experiments refer to a number of years of physical mediumship seances that took place in the village of Scole, near Dis in Norfolk in England. They occurred in the late 1990s. For us, visits took place in 1996 and 1997. For Sarah and I, they represented transformative, unequivocal, and really quite stunning evidence of paranormal intervention, of movement of objects and people, and we can talk in detail about that. Generally speaking, they're so difficult to believe, they have become controversial. But some commentators believe them to be the most evidential experiments ever to take place, providing evidence through physical mediumship of the reality of other worlds, let's say, even if people don't believe in spirit or spirit worlds. And that would include non-human intelligence.
Who were the original people that set the experiments up? Who were they?
Robin Foy was the main organizer, the main spokesperson, and his wife, Sandra Foy, was more of an organizer and looked after the kind of the details of people's visits. The two main mediums, deep trance mediums, were Alan and Diana Bennett. And although originally the Scole group contained another one or two people, the phenomena didn't really take off until it was just Alan, Diana, Sandra, and Robin. I always found Robin, who's passed now, to be a self-publicist. Not surprising, he worked in the newspaper industry, so he had a keen awareness of how to present a story to get attention. But having said that, I found him to be persuasive, and in the event, you could back up pretty much everything that he would say. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Sarah and I visited for the first time. I understood it was to be a dark seance, and yet he was speaking of clear evidence that we would see. So I said, so are we going to have lights? And he burst out laughing. And he said, not electric lights, Nick, but hey, don't worry, spirit will deal with that. And he wasn't joking. Within minutes, Spirit lit up the whole room with the self-illuminating orbs by the dozen and more over two and a half hours on the first visit, and something similar for the second. But let me bring in Sarah, because her view of going into the Scole cellar, called the Scole hole, is slightly different from mine. Recollections can alter a little bit. So,
no, they were both couples were very welcoming. Wanted to ensure that we were at ease. We had a little presentation prior to entering the cellar, but they did ask us to remove all our jewelry so that we didn't have anything metal on us at all.
And what's the reasoning behind that?
Well,
there was a perception, I don't know if it's still valid today, but at that time that there would be energies in the room that would react to metal if it was on our bodies. and it wouldn't be a positive enhancing effect. I didn't get into discussion because I was quite happy, as with Sarah, to take off her jewellery.
Yeah, fair enough.
But they didn't want money in their pockets, which would be another example. One might suspect that they just wanted to frisk searchers.
I
Right?
see. A surreptitious way of making sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but we were happy for that as well. And in fact, everyone was frisk searched in terms of the visitors coming to the location. And the room was checked beforehand by me and one or two others on both of the visits. Concrete floor, brick built cellar, really nothing that would be easy to set up equipment for a hoax of any kind. I'll mention something, it's a minor detail and quite insignificant, really, but there was a coal chute going into that cellar, and it was basically a wooden box in the wall which led up to an entry point at ground level. I checked it, I couldn't see any evidence that it could be moved, and in fact the room was so small we would almost certainly have heard it anyway. But I mention it simply because it was the only thing that wasn't brick and concrete in the room, apart from the doors.
Amazing. So, how did you two get directly involved? I mean, obviously you were invited there. What were the reasonings behind you two specifically?
There's two ways to look at it. One way is to say that I was the president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, and I was known as having an investigative interest in spiritualist and paranormal phenomena. So it would have been kind of obvious if Robin was being investigated by the SPR in London, that he might also want to involve an SPR person from Scotland. Another way to explain it would be a friend of ours, the late medium Albert Best, said he would introduce me to the only group that he knew that was inviting members of the public in for reliable demonstrations of physical phenomena. And he said he would introduce me to the group, but unfortunately, he died before that happened. But shortly after his death, the Scole group got in touch with a mutual friend, and the mutual friend said, "Oh, that's interesting. Nick Kyle was told about this group. I'm sure he would want to come." And the invitation was made to both of us.
But our mutual friend as well sat in seance with us and two others. So there were in fact 5 of us who had been in this seance group for quite a few months, in fact, maybe a year or more. So we all knew each other quite well.
I gotcha.
Can I just say something though, and I hope it doesn't come across as too negative. I've been sitting in home circles and spiritualist church circles for most of the last 30 or 40 years, and very seldom found anything worth reporting. Yes, there would be some traditional phenomena, but nothing that would impress a skeptic or someone who was looking for replicable, reliable, repeated evidence. Having said that, I was persistent after the Scole experiments because I had seen with my own eyes and experienced what could happen. And I tried to implement using their protocols for a decade before I realized I was making a fundamental error. I wasn't taking account of the role of emotion in producing phenomena. I was what I call norm reference. If something happens, say an orb or a flash of light, I would say, yeah, I saw it, but it wasn't as impressive as the ones at Scole. And I kept putting down the evidence that was just beginning to emerge in our home circle. Sarah might have more to say about that, because after I realized my mistake, we were taken to a seance by 2 of our own home circle who had their own group subsequently. And I realized that the phenomena was as spectacular as the Scole experiments. and it was based on a very different emotional link between sitters and spirit, and I have always said since that you need a loving bond to facilitate communication.
I can only re-echo that. Yes,
Yeah.
pardon me, that sometimes the negativity, which I don't think for 1 minute Nick necessarily believed he was delivering like that, but the positivity and the acceptance of what we received almost was not belittled, but made light of, and negative comparisons. So it's hugely important that people are sitting like that. There is positivity, there is goodwill and kindness to all around.
But
So it's
one thing I would say,
open-mindedness, isn't it? Essentially, you've got to be open-minded and then positive.
Yeah.
I think a phrase that sticks out to me is that a few people have said it to me. You've got to get out of your own way.
Exactly.
Which I'm like you, Nick. I need to get out of my way because I tend to overthink, and that probably would ruin my experience should I have been in your shoes. You know what I mean?
well, I certainly was overthinking at school, and spirit exceeded my expectations so dramatically that I was pretty much silenced. I couldn't think of any way to explain what was happening right in front of me. But we can come to that later. One thing I would stress, Paul, to your audience is there is a fundamental issue in the investigation of phenomena, especially phenomena under seance conditions or by mediums. And the way I would put it is, if it's about relationships and positive emotion, and it's on that basis that spirit can interact with us more effectively, how do you build up relationships? Well, in the ordinary sense of the word, my wife's here, you treat the person nicely and positively, and you have positive expectations of them, and you're appreciative, and there's give and take, and you go out your way to accommodate what would please them. And if that's mutual, you've got the beginnings of a relationship. But think about the average parapsychologist. The average parapsychologist says, I don't really believe in what you've been saying, but I'm going to put it to the test so that I can demonstrate whether it's actually there or not. So I'm going to watch your every move. I'm going to impose conditions upon you. Basically, you're going to be a liar until you prove to me what the truth is. And how many relationships would survive that as their opening steps?
Yeah.
So I think that the skeptical, almost cynical or doubting beliefs of investigators can close down phenomena before anything else happens, simply because they put up so many verbal and psychological blocks. Yeah.
But then isn't that such a fine line, because you need to be cynical, you need to be skeptical, you need to have those things to objectively test, and study. But if that's also antithetical to what you need to do to get the experience, then you can't win.
Well, you can win.
Good.
It depends on who you're working with and where you're working, and it worked at Scole, as we'll go on to discover. Professor Chris Rowe, who heads up the largest parapsychology unit in the UK, if not the world, he has started to work with mediums in the Arthur Findlay College that's run by the Spiritualist National Union in Stansted. And he's trying to cultivate relationships that are mutually positive with mediums to see if that encourages the phenomena. Now, I'm not privy to the details of his study, and I think there have been several students doing PhDs that have gone in there and worked with mediums. But at least it shows an awareness of the issue and an attempt to overcome it. My frustration is Sarah and I have experienced such wonderful things that we think the phenomena might have a condition of spontaneity rather than expectation by skeptics. In other words, if we don't demand that something happens at a set date and time, if we simply encourage the conditions for it to happen, it will happen spontaneously.
I got
But
you.
that doesn't mean to say that we can then demand it happens 100 times for strangers.
Sure. Now, then that makes complete sense. And that, I suppose this is the perfect time for you to both go into what did you see, what did you hear, what did you feel, all the sensory stuff. I'll just throw it over to you and you hit me with whatever you've got.
Once we'd had our short video and talk, pardon me, from Robin,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd been asked to remove jewelry, money, coins, all of that there, with 5 other people. So there would be 10, that's 10 visitors altogether. This was on our first visit. We were invited into the cellar and we were positioned in seats. So we didn't pick our seat randomly. We were just set there. A group of 5, another group of 5, and then the 4 main characters from the Scole group. And you locked the door, I believe, if I remember correctly.
I checked the room before.
Checked the room beforehand, but we were sitting in front of the door. And we were sitting quite tightly, maybe not just as tight as this, but the space between us. And the cellar was quite small. So almost like a sphere there, but you had a little space, maybe 6-8 inches behind you, between your chair and the wall.
Gotcha.
And in the middle, a coffee table, a large wooden coffee table with things on it. To my right, as it turned out, was a little table with, at that time, a cassette recorder that was subsequently played in upbeat, uplifting music.
Okay.
And just to be clear, there was no space for a human being to go round the room, behind the sitters, between the sitters, or step forward and manipulate anything in the coffee table that was in the centre of the circle. Plus, the 4 mediums, if we want to call them that, the 2 deep trance mediums and Robin and Sandra, all wore illuminated tabs on their clothing, their legs, their wrists, cuffs, and their torso, so that we could see any movement from the reflected light that came off the tabs. I'll come back to that point later when it comes to could any of this have been holographic in nature, but I'll not mention it right at the start. So in blackout conditions, you couldn't see 1 inch in front of your nose. For over an hour, small self-illuminating orbs flew around the room. And they flew at high speeds. At no time did they collide with objects in the room or people. They illuminated their surroundings as they passed by. And then they began to go through solid objects. They went into a crystal and illuminated it. They went through a wooden table. They buzzed around the room. And I was surprised at the dexterity, the trajectories of these lights, because they didn't just, for example, go in a circle and come back, which one might have thought was a piece of fishing line round or something. No, it was more like up, down, roundabout, under your arm, through your legs, and under the table, and so on, for over an hour. It wasn't just a few seconds of something like that. I had never seen energy lights that could physically be touched. And I'd never seen so many energy lights as at Scole. So, for example, anyone with an elementary knowledge of conjuring would realize how you would fake a light going through a table. And the answer would be you take an LED and you lower it to just where it touches the table and switch it off. a second LED under the table is then illuminated and pulled out. So it looks like the light has gone through the table, but it's actually two lights. So you need probably two participants, two plants to be doing that, but certainly a very dexterous two-handed person might. But here's the problem with that. Even although a light going through a solid wooden table is not necessarily in itself paranormal, it is if the light goes inside someone's rib cage and makes them squeal. And that's what happened to Sarah.
Just to go back about these.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
When these first started, it looked, the ceiling looked as if there were stars on it. And these little pinprick lights got larger and larger. And they were a creamy green colour. And when they flew around the room, they also went round the chair legs. So it, you start to rationalise it, and you're not able to rationalise it at all. And you're thinking, am I imagining this? But you're not. And the important thing is, as they grew in size, you could see the features on other people. So the people the other side of the coffee table, whom I didn't know before that and have not met since, I could see their faces. I could see who was sitting next to me. Can I say, not as clear as Nick is sitting next to me, but I knew, their eyes when they were blinking or whatever. And the speed of these orbs was breathtaking. And they would rush up to people and just almost skid to a stop. And you're thinking, I am actually seeing this. And you're pinching yourself because it's not anything in your life that you've necessarily
No,
seen.
it doesn't sit in with your current paradigm. A couple of questions here, right? First off, when you see the people opposite you in the faint glow of the orbs, are they just mouth agog?
Like us.
Yeah.
Yes.
What the? And then
Yes.
I want to know what your first thoughts are. Whoa, what is this? Were you like fearful, or was it all of the above?
Okay, well, we had seen lights on a number of occasions in previous seances, as indeed our fellow travellers from Scotland. We were all experienced in physical phenomena, but this is on another level at school. It was as if what we had been used to seeing was a little of that and one happening of that and very little of that. In school, the jaws were dropping.
Jaw dropping.
Let me give you an example. I have watched David Copperfield twice now, I think, demonstrating on stage in front of hundreds of witnesses things that were very difficult to explain. But he had two articulated lorries full of equipment.
Yeah, why? Because he needs it. Yeah.
In school, I could explain most of what David Copperfield did with equipment, but in school there was almost no equipment, and even David Copperfield couldn't get inside Sarah's ribcage. Yeah.
Even if he tried, that's a no.
He's very funny.
So there was another instance in which people were being touched all over their body and their hands and so on by these lights over time. And I, with a slightly pitted lip, said, "No spirit lights have touched me." And Robin said, "Put your hand out." And I went like that. And immediately a light on the other side of the room shot round, came in front of the palm of my hand and began to tap it. And as I moved my hand like that, the movement was up and down. And I said to Robin, "Is it okay if I clasp my hands?" And he said, "Yes." So I went. Now I had the light between my two hands and it was bouncing around. It had a rubbery sort of texture. And as the light was coming out from between my fingers, as I turned my hands like that, because I was wanting to know, could there be a very fine nylon line attached to an LED? And that solved the question, because it's not possible for that to be. And then I opened my hands like so. The light came up, shone a light into my face, and shot off to the other side of the room again. In other words, it was exactly what I needed to show that this was physical rather than just some optical illusion. and that it was responsive, that its trajectory showed intelligent flight or direction, and I could feel the physical touch. There was nothing so gentle that one might think, was that my imagination?
No.
It was like me tapping you. And
It was
saying,
purposeful.
Yes.
So that was important. But when you said earlier, what was your initial reaction? I'll tell you my reaction. We sat in total darkness for a very short amount of time, and I looked up at the brick-built ceiling and saw a solar system of stars, little pinpricks of light, and they were turning very, very slowly, as one might imagine a cosmos to do. And I looked up and I thought to myself, I didn't say it out loud, wow, someone has built a planetarium putting fiber optic cables into the painted brickwork so that they wouldn't be easily seen. And they're sitting at a computer and they're showing basically the cosmos as it would appear in a planetarium. But then the lights come down to just above head height, where you could almost reach them if you put your hand up. And they still began to go round the room in that same manner. And then, of course, the lights began to spread. And that's the interactivity that I was referring to. So it was, phenomenal doesn't do it justice. I still think 20 odd years ago, it was as if it happened recently.
I think that's the important thing. It's so fresh in our minds. And, to go back and talk about these, what looked like LED lights, but where this creamish green effect when you looked at them, watching other people's jaws dropping because they were experiencing what we were, the lights that went into that Nick was able to clasp, and as he was saying, they would race up to you and maybe touch you, nothing gentle but nothing hard, but as you have alluded to, purposeful. And the seat I was sitting in, the one that raced up to me and sat literally at my rib cage, as some of the others were, and had a purpose, was the one that decided to outshine everything else. And there was a pop, and it disappeared. But it disappeared, and everyone around could see that it had disappeared. And inside, and I heard the pop, felt pop. And then the strangest feeling for me with this was as if something was scratching my inside. And there was another pop, maybe 10 seconds this lasted. And people were saying, the light's out again. Because the pop and the light coming out, light.
Yeah, sure. What did you take the meaning behind that visit into you to be? Was it just to prove that it could be everywhere or anywhere?
To be honest, I squealed. I wasn't thinking anything at all that was logical. Afterwards, you would think, yes, there is. It's just to demonstrate that it can do it and it has that. But you don't go there expecting something like that, which defies everything you've learned as a child in science lessons all over, that something can pop in and the sound is a pop. And the person who was sitting next to me kept saying, it's disappeared, it's in there. And I could, even before that, you could feel almost as if something was trying to get out, the scrapings of something to try and get out.
Now, was the pop only audible to you, or did everyone else hear
other
it?
people.
Other people.
That's amazing.
Yep.
So, isn't it?
Just in case your audience think, okay, so they had a light show, big deal. Okay. We also saw a hand materializing in front of us over the table, which then moved a bowl. I think it was a Pyrex bowl, a glass bowl, and then a disembodied voice in the middle of the room conversed with us and gave accurate, clairvoyant information. For example, about Sarah, that nobody in that room would know. Sarah partially levitated in her chair. She can talk about that. Bells hanging in front of us, illuminated by the lights, swayed and rang with no one seeing to touch them. There was no obvious breeze in the room. Several people were touched, and all of these things were accompanied by remarks which the mediums attributed to spirit entities. And what they said was in itself good evidence that there was some kind of intelligence behind all of this.
Okay, before we jump into that stuff, Nick, I have a couple of questions on what has been said already, and then we'll go into those things, and I have questions on that. The first one is obviously the introduction of the lights, if you will, the Cosmos version down. Two things come to my head. One, it's a soft introduction. It's an easy blending into the experience. Or is it them having to slowly coming from wherever they're coming from to here? Is it a process, or was it a soft introduction in your mind? Or both?
I think probably both.
I would say both.
Yeah. And it was a soft introduction, you are right. But we didn't know what to expect. So I think it was probably very sensible that things were gradual.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And then it was so light that you could see the people's faces, expressions at the other side of the coffee table and round you. So we could see everything that was going on.
No, that was just the first visit to school. We made a second visit, and we were surprised to be invited the second time.
Yeah, but I think we should deal with that after we've finished the discussion.
Yes, if you don't mind, because I know it's going to grow and grow and grow. But you said something interesting about a crystal on the table. The light went inside, and obviously a crystal got facets. Did the light then shoot out in all different directions? So made you think, right, that's definitely inside that crystal?
I would say the crystal glowed.
Okay.
And before and subsequently, when it was examined, there was nothing to suggest that it had been electrified or manipulated in any obvious way. It was just a white quartz crystal. What might be of interest to you is that I bought a white quartz crystal from them. No, it wasn't very expensive. I brought it home. I brought it into my own dark circle, black circle in my home, and the crystal glowed as it had done at school. A week later, which was our second meeting of the home circle, it didn't glow, it sparked at the points of the crystal, and it's never sparked or glowed since in 20 odd years. Right?
Residual energy, you would say?
Yeah, yes, I would. I'm not a great believer in crystals the way other people are, but I would acknowledge to anyone that the glow was so strong that you could read print if you put it beside the crystal.
Yes.
Well, that's quality on its own, isn't it? It's more evidence. Because that standard crystals don't do that unless they're submitted to a life source for a long period of time.
Especially when you take them out of that environment into your own home environment, and it still happens.
Yeah, how strange. But I like it. I like it. So another thing as well, where you said that the lights were bouncing initially around objects, almost like, were they discovering the space, or are they proving that they can do that?
I don't think I can answer that one. You could say both, because, or maybe it was just evidence for us that they weren't banging into things.
Yes, that's it. It's purposeful again.
These spirit lights, these intelligences, if you want to call them that were directing the lights, they were used to the school environment, the school cellar.
Gotcha.
And they would be aware of every seat within that, and the table and so on, the height, the dimensions. So I would think they were used to the environment, but they were exploring the sitters.
Got you. And I have one final question before we move on here. Yeah? Sorry for that. Are the points of light an individual consciousness, if we, for want of a better phrase, or when you said the phrase a minute ago, they were directed lights by an intelligence? Were each of the things an intelligence, or was it just facets of an intelligence?
I have evidence that some orbs contain faces of people.
Yes,
I have a photograph or two to suggest that. I've also been told by spiritualists that orbs are an indication of a forthcoming energy change. In other words, you would expect to see orbs before you see materializations or physical phenomena. Some spiritualists would say it's not an individual person or spirit person. It is a sign that they are about to manifest or do something in the environment, if you like, an energy bubble that we can see. I have an open mind as to what the lights might have been. It's particularly when they get bigger, because in our second visit, the lights were no longer LED size. They were the size of marbles and occasionally slightly smaller than a table tennis ball.
Wow. Wow. So we'll get back. You've had the experience where it goes into you, and that you're still mouth agog at that point. And then Nick, you mentioned materializations of body parts and stuff. So if we can go into that, and then no doubt I'll have questions for you on this.
Yeah, in that first visit, the only materialization that I saw other than the lights was a hand that appeared over the coffee table. There was no arm and body attached, just the wrist and the hand. And that it seemed to pick up a glass bowl. I can't quite remember whether it lifted it by the edge or underneath, and it was just one hand. It was during the second visit that full materializations took place.
Yes, but for me, that was slightly different, because where I was sitting, the not full materialization, but shape and form and conversation took place between an identity or an entity and myself.
That's the owner of the hand, are we saying that?
No, a completely different.
Okay.
We presume, because this was completely different to that. Partway through, a voice said to me, "Would you shake my hand, please? Would it be okay?" And you're just thinking, right, where did this come from? Because all the time you're trying to rationalize things, and you're not coming up with very many rational answers. And it was a shape had appeared in front of me. Now, it was quite wispy. Other people could hear the voice, but the shape asked if I would shake its hand. And I did. And this hand was there. Now, I reached out, the hand reached out and shook mine. It did not feel rubbery. That was really, because you just think there has to be something here that's
some tomfoolery ahead, yeah.
Yes, some tomfoolery. But it was warm. It was a male hand, but beside this, almost, it's really hard to describe what it was. The outline, the shape of a man in front of me, but beside him there was a second person. And between the two of them, I got the distinct feeling they were just having a little bit of fun with me.
Okay.
So they said, shaking the hand, and the first one whose hands I was shaking said, "Would you like to feel up my arm?"
To which you responded,
"Yes."
Yeah, I would as well.
I know, and I'm shaking hands, and I'm going up there, and it was sounded like this, where you could actually feel an arm. And I got to the elbow, and my hand went right through it.
That's weird.
Yes, and again, you don't expect it. You don't expect that to happen. You don't expect to be able to feel this arm, and then nothing. But I was still holding a hand.
So, like, could you do this? That's what you're doing, sort of like going round it. That's proper weird. Was it a clothed arm or hairy arm or what?
It was a male. It was a male. It was quite large. It was a male, unless it. Well, it's just a. Oh yeah. I mean, we're talking. You just couldn't see the full image of it, but you knew there was a person standing there. I knew it was a male, and beside him there was another person. And they laughed. You didn't expect that. And you're thinking, no, I didn't.
And I could see this as well. because I was looking at it from not quite the other side of the room, but from several chairs away, and I could see the black outline as the lights was around. I could see the outline of what looked to me like a male-sized person, I mean, male physique, and standing in front of Sarah, and Sarah was looking, up from a seated position. So I could hear whispering voices rather than clear voices, because of course everyone in the room was speaking and reacting to their own experiences, as well as what was happening with Sarah. When Sarah's chair levitated, several members of the group exclaimed loudly, "My God, she's up in the air."
I want to know, right, that the arm, well, we'll talk about the chair momentarily, but the arm coming through, the imagery I've got in my mind is of a guy standing on the opposite side of a doorway, and he's reaching through the doorway, so that's where the cutoff is.
There was no doorway.
But the imagery in my mind is, that's the portal, if you will,
yeah,
and it's cut off. When you felt around this arm, could you feel like bone and stuff in there?
No, I didn't. It just literally went through. And again, I have to say, really foolishly, if it happened to me now, it would be entirely different. I screamed, "There's nothing there! There's nothing there!"
Yeah, that would freak me out, I think, but in a good way.
But I didn't feel unsafe. That was, you may well be freaked out, but I didn't feel unsafe. And it wasn't to do with the fact that there were all these people in the room. Didn't make me feel unsafe, which was important.
And although it's not relevant to Scole, when we came back to Scotland and we sat in on the seance that was run by two friends of ours, I experienced the same thing. I shook a man's hand. I was invited to feel up his arm, and around just above the elbow, my hand couldn't detect a body attached, and I was still gripping a man's hand. Now, I have a strong handshake, but I wasn't trying to crush the hand. I simply knew it was a genuine hand with a skeletal structure. I could feel the skin, the texture. If I wasn't in that situation, I would have sworn I shook a man's hand.
And did they give you any explanation of this? What are they saying? Because in your mind, you're going to have questions like, "I'm shaking someone's hand, but you're not there." Did any voices come and say, "Right, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it"?
Yes. Well, not so much just what you've articulated. What happened was this particular man introduced himself as George.
Well, this was your experience
in Scotland.
In Scotland.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I said who I thought the George might be, and he made a joke out of it by saying, "Well, I'm certainly not George from Asda."
Very recent, then. He knows of Asda. So
he said, "Would you like to feel up my arm? I've been told," I think he said, "I've been told how skeptical you are," or he said, "I understand how skeptical you are." So I said yes and felt up his arm and had a similar experience to Sarah at school.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But Paul, you're in the middle of this, and when you tell the story like this here, it's light, it's quite cold, it's etc. But when you're in that sort of situation and unusual things are happening that you cannot explain, and something like shaking a person's hand or the light going into my rib cage, there's part of you then thinks, what else is going to happen?
Of course.
Well,
what next? It's already grown to here, yeah.
That might be a point to move to the second visit, which is even more impressive in terms of evidence. I'm just aware of the time, Paul, and you said about an hour in school. And
I'm okay to go a bit longer if we need to, because I haven't covered all my stuff, and this is fascinating. But we will hit it all.
Do you want me to describe the second visit, or do you have more questions?
I do have more questions.
Okay.
I know that objects came in next, or is that in the second Scole visit?
That's the second.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's go into that then, because I imagine my questions sort of go up from there. So let's say, go into the second one then.
So, same sort of presentation, same basement room, painted brick, checked beforehand as before. The bells rang mysteriously, small, pale, green-blue tinged lights streaked around us, partially illuminating our surroundings, which had been in blackout conditions. But there was a difference in the lights. Some of them seemed hooded, so the light was being directed in a beam in different directions as they flew around. If you like tiny torchlights, just without a body. You know, normally a torch has a body you would hold onto. And they whizzed around, illuminating the contents of the central table, the sitters' faces as they whizzed around the rooms. They would hover sometimes inches from people, and they allowed unambiguous corroboration that they were intelligently controlled, able to move at high speed, and they were interested in each of us. Each of us got a light at some point illuminating us before it whizzed off to someone else and illuminated them.
During this as well, Paul, people were talking quite freely. Did you see? What did you see? Asking. So nobody would say, oh, I definitely saw this or that. What did you see? So that we weren't leading people on with maybe what we perceived to be. And that conversation kept going on, and during both sittings, once people got over the shock of what they had initially experienced.
I'm glad you mentioned perception, by the way. Just a quick thing here on perception. It was all the same thing, everyone witnessed at the same time, or was there in some way an individual perception of things slightly different?
The individual perception would be what you would expect in a group setting. In other words, nobody said, I can't see that, and nobody said, I see something very different.
Yeah.
But there would be differences of perspective or angles, and not everyone saw everything close up all of the time, because, for example, the things that happened to Sarah were closer to her, and things that happened to other people would be closer to them. So no, I have no worries about people having individual psychic experiences that others were not privy to. It was all very open and shared. But let me just describe to you what happened, because that would maybe take away that question. I don't wish to give any impression of ego, but we were told this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have the first visit, and that it might never happen again. And there were lots of people in a waiting list. And we did get an invite back 6 months later, and I queried it. I said to Robin Foy, I thought this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It says, so did we. The Spirit team have asked for the 5 people from Scotland, because we contributed so well to the energies. They want to try and experiment the likes of which they've never done before. Now that intrigued me, because I thought it was maybe a bit of flattery or something. But we travelled all the way down there from Scotland the second time, the same people. A hypnotherapist was one of our group to make sure that we weren't being hypnotised in the first or the second visit, and that was his conclusion. Someone else had been developing mediumship and been in various circles for many years of his life. So he was a good person to discuss these things with. But anyway, so we were told that we were going to see phenomena that had never been seen before in the Scole group by our hosts. So they weren't sure what was going to happen. Robin Foy said, we've been told we need to sit and wait. He said, and I'm not sure how long, but it might be 15 minutes. And it wasn't quite as long as that. And the reason was because these phenomena were going to come from a level of, let's say, existence that the Spirit team did not have access to.
Whoa.
So they opened up a portal, and intelligences from another level, we subsequently concluded they might be non-human intelligences. We were dubious. We had already had fantastic evidence. What could be better than what we had already experienced in terms of paranormal evidence? and then spaceships materialized in the middle of the room.
Yeah, draw
Now,
dropping
listen,
part
Paul.
2.
Well, can we just talk about that for a minute?
Yes.
The light shapes that were like little torches. Okay? The light shapes took form. And I hated to use the word spaceships because I think it conjures up, well, these two are cuckoo. Or in fact, all of the
Oh no,
people there.
not to me and the people watching or listening. We're on board.
All right. From that point of view. And that's the only description that we can actually put on it to accurately convey what we saw.
It was as if someone had taken the orbs we spoke about before and taken a laser pen and connected them in a three-dimensional drawing. And we ended up with something that looked like a wedge of cheese or cake because it had a bulbous end and a triangular front. And as it moved around the room, other shapes began to appear. One was a classic saucer shape with a dome on top. One looked like a helicopter, but it had no blades. What's the name of the big helicopters that carry heavy weights?
Chinooks.
Chinooks. It looked like a Chinook with no blades. And underneath it, there were little white filaments or wires carrying something that, for all the world, looked like a handkerchief. It was white, it seemed to flow with the movement of the air. I don't know what it was, but as this thing was going around the room, it was dragging this underneath it in exactly the way you would expect if it was carrying something and it was moving against an air current, right?
I got you. Yeah.
And I thought that there were about 5 of these shapes, I think.
Yes, I think so.
And they didn't last very long individually, but collectively they would have lasted, maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that.
About that. Throughout all of that, Paul, we're all talking about what we're seeing. And nobody is, yes, I can see that there are lights. That shape looks like whatever. Because a little bit of it, we were babbling because we didn't believe what we were seeing.
And in this three-dimensional drawing, the inside, as it were, became translucent. In other words, it glowed a little bit. And then it seemed to achieve solidity. So it was materializing and filling out. Now, here's the thing that impressed me. If you imagine, and we'll take this can here, if this is the object, okay, from underneath there were little searchlight beams. And one of the beams might pick up an item on the coffee table, and as it went round the room above people's heads, the light never left its focus, its target. It always stayed on the item on the coffee table. Now, there were 3, 4, 5 lights under different objects that did this simultaneously. Now, just think about it for a moment. If anybody had been manipulating this, they would have one light on, let's say, a bowl, another light on a sitter, another light on an item on the other side of the coffee table, and it's whizzing around the room like this and never losing the 3 points of target focus. I don't know how easy that would be to fake in the 1990s.
Well, I don't think you could do it now.
So that impressed me, but we've not got to the pinnacle yet. A tube appeared, similar to a downpipe in its size, but maybe only 2 feet in length, a little more maybe. And as it appeared, I just thought, this is another flying object. It's a cylinder this time. And then it turned so I could see into it, and it looked like broken glass that was illuminated. Shards of light, all intersecting and sort of with each other. But here's the point. I looked into a 2-foot tube and looked as if I was looking into a 5-foot tube. I could see depth in that tube. That surprised me when I looked at the side of it because it was relatively short. And then a pair of hands came out of the tube.
As if it weren't weird enough already, and then hands come out of it. I know.
A pair of hands came out of the tube. Now, they were miniaturized, I would reckon they belong to a woman, but miniaturized, but possibly a young girl with nice, graceful, long fingers and fingernails.
But
And
they were
things.
gloved. They were gloved hands. And
Yeah.
they shaped. They opened and closed.
Yeah. So as
Like
the
that.
tube came round, let's imagine the three of us, it would point at you, Paul. You would see the hands come out towards you like this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like a blessing. Is that what you took it at?
Yeah.
Never
And
thought
it
of
did
that
it. It did it to each person in turn. It was opening and closing in almost like a prayer.
Hmm.
And I was gobsmacked at that because this suggested to me human entities, which was the hands,
Hands, yeah.
that were able to come through these three-dimensional flying objects. And I had never seen anything like that before it. Now, that to me would represent the end of the light phenomena. But again, it took more than an hour for this experience to take place. So I'm expecting you to ask me, do I have any explanation that would be rational?
I know you haven't, because you would have volunteered for it to me up front.
Uh-huh.
Well, there is something that I've got which is worth considering. I do menial tasks in the film and television industry, or I did at that time, driving mainly. And I met a couple of guys from the special effects department at Sony Pictures. Okay? And I'm sitting having a chat with them, just casually in conversation. And I said to them, can I describe a situation to you? And can you tell me if you could replicate it in 3D in front of witnesses? Right? And they said, okay, and you go. I said, okay, you've got this size of room, and it's brick built, and there's a coffee table in the middle, and the chairs are close to each other, and there's no space behind the chairs and so on. So I described the situation. I didn't talk about spirit or seances or anything. And I said, and lights appear. And I described the formation, the movement of the lights, how they got bigger and so on. And I said, I'm not saying, could you do this on screen using CGI? Remember this in the 1990s.
Mm.
What I said to them was, could you do it in real three-dimensional, real life in front of witnesses? Create a three-dimensional object and have it whizzing around and so on. And they said no. And I said, guys, if I had £1 million, if you could do that, would that make the difference? And of course, I don't have £1 million. I was chancing my arm. And they said, no. And I thought they were brushing me off because I was telling a very strange story. And the guy leant forward and said, you're not listening. In order to create a three-dimensional holographic image, we need 3 oil-dampened platforms. Each one's roughly the size of an armchair. There's no room in that room, in the dimensions you've given us, to put these 3 projectors there. And certainly they would be noticed by the sitters because of their size. Second problem, you describe lights as going into and around surfaces like round legs and under tables and so on. We need constant line of sight by all 3 projectors in order to preserve the integrity of the image. And if one of those lights goes, you can tell by looking at the image it's changed. It's fainter maybe or fuzzier. He said, and you talk about the lights moving at high speed. In the 1990s, remember, they said, we can't achieve that without a blurring action in the holographic image. He said, never mind the dexterity with which he said, but there's something else. It wouldn't matter how much money you gave us, Nick. We can't get a hologram to touch people.
Exactly.
So
that answered everything for you. Yeah, exactly.
That was my attempt to explain it. And I was going as far as I could possibly go in getting a rationalist explanation. And I was being told by the experts, you're talking rubbish. This couldn't happen the way you're suggesting.
And overall, what you're being told is just to shut up and accept it.
Well,
what you saw, I mean. Yeah, you know what I mean? Because you'll keep trying and trying and trying. But no, trust your eyes. That's what ultimate message is to you, I think. I don't know.
Not just trust your eyes, trust all your senses, the sense of touch.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. You mentioned the word experiment, that the spirit world was linking to somewhere else, and it was one of my questions I've written down, which is, do these Scole experiments suggest that there's some measure of scientific team on at the other side doing experiments here?
I think there must have been a scientists, plural, in the spirit team that were communicating with the school group. But there was no particular evidence during our two sittings that scientists were involved. The mediums were providing accurate clairvoyance, but nothing of a scientific nature. But anyone who reads about the Scole experiments will realize that on other occasions they got a lot of scientific information. In fact, the late Professor Archie Roy, who was a well-known astronomer, once said that in his conversations, in the one visit he had to the Scole group, he had a conversation about celestial mechanics, the likes of which only half a dozen people in the world could sustain their end of the conversation. And this deceased entity, through the medium, was able to maintain a discussion with Archie Roy. So there's a suggestion that there was a scientist in the spirit team side. The other thing is Professor Arthur Ellison was a professor of electrical engineering, and he was given photographs of electrical circuits in a diagram to replicate in our 3D world. That suggests scientific knowledge was being given to him because the device worked. However, it was reported to me that it only worked in the Scole group for the Scole group. It didn't work when you took it out of the seance room and strangers tried to use it.
That's mental. That is proper mental.
Yeah, there's a small thing that I don't like to avoid speaking about, but I don't know what it does for the story. It's just part of the story. One orb, roughly the size of a marble, but maybe the size of a table tennis ball, a little bigger than a marble, landed at my feet during the second visit, and its light dimmed. And inside that sphere, there was a tiny, dumpy little plane. In other words, it had a nose and it had two wings and a little tail coming up. But it looked like a child's toy. It was very small. It didn't look capable of flying. And then the light came back on. It became a white sphere and it flew off. Now, what that suggested to me was even spirit need to use devices. But their device was the likes of which I had never seen before, except as a child's toy that wouldn't fly. But theirs could fly.
Which brings me to the question on that, Nick, which is the objects that we're seeing, and you've mentioned some of them, the UFOs indeed, all that. What is the meaning behind them, if they do have meaning? I mean, because like with the spirit world, a lot of it is imagery and metaphor and things like that. So the objects coming in, are they metaphors, or are they... No, this is just a demonstration and that's it. Did they have meaning, essentially?
I think in Scole and in a whole lot of other occasions, spirit want to demonstrate, first of all, that they exist. Now, I'm saying spirit to cover other dimensional or interdimensional communicators. They may be human, deceased humans, as spiritualists would normally expect, or they may be non-human intelligences. They may be extraterrestrial, but I'll tell you why I don't like the term. I think they're terrestrial. I think they belong to Earth. They're just on another level of consciousness.
Just phased out.
Another level of frequency, perhaps. Think of it like a radio set. All of the channels in the radio are constantly passing us by. But with the right equipment, we can tap into some of them. So it's a similar kind of concept. I think there are times when spirit want to demonstrate that they exist, even if we argue over the nature of the species involved. And there are other times when they want to come through with a message to prompt action, to change beliefs, to encourage people. And then, of course, in the wider context of paranormal investigations, they sometimes come through for mischievous reasons or in ways that upset and frighten people.
The
So
joys
in
of
the
the whole
Scole
thing.
group-
But yeah,
In the Scole group, it was only positive.
I love it. I love it. And I think we're going to end on that positive note, actually. So thank you ever so much, Sarah and Nick, for telling me all about the Scole experiments. To be honest, I could be here days with you discussing it because my mind just goes boom, next, 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 next.
Yes.
And I know yours would have done the same thing and you'd have pondered it over the years. It's an immense subject, and I wish I was in your position. So it was a once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime. I wish I would have been there, but that is what it is.
And here's the tragedy, really. It didn't herald a new dawn of man-spirit communication, the way the spirit communicators had hoped, the way Robin had expected. It produced controversy rather than unequivocal evidence in the skeptical mainstream community. And everybody involved has largely died. Robin and Sandra have passed on. The three investigators, Montague Keane, David Quintana, and Professor Arthur Ellison, they've gone. Some of the commentators and critics at the time have gone. Alan and Diana Bennett are still alive, but don't want to talk about it in public. They're carrying on their own experiments, but they're different in kind. They're to do with microscopic or very small images in crystals, but they need special camera technology to get them.
Let me ask you one question here, Nick, and it might sound quite shitty, but it's not meant that way. If you hadn't have been involved directly in it, what would you have thought about it being from the outside? Would you have been uber skeptical about the immensity of what had been reported?
If I hadn't visited,
hadn't been in there, but you were told the stories of somebody like you being in there, what would you have thought?
I would have thought they were all being conned by the most elaborate hoaxer or conjurer possible, until I heard who was involved. These are some of the cleverest minds the UK could come up with. And 30 sessions were opened up to scientists in Europe. Even people from NASA were involved. When the Scole group went to America, they demonstrated in Ibiza. It wasn't just the peculiarities of the Scole hole, the cellar that was the location, although that may have been helped. It wasn't very far from the St. Michael Mary ley line that passes through southern England. So if I was to hear that these people that I admire, and I have some of their books beside me, were totally conned, and having read their 300-page report, I would have believed them, because I can't think of a stronger sense of evidence than what we've just been speaking about. But I've had my own evidence before and mainly after Scole, which has left me in no doubt. I have lost my fear of death because I know that intelligence survives in some way, maybe not the orthodox religious picture of angels and harps and thrones.
They always have to have a harp, don't they? Some of us can't play harps. Come on. Right, we'll end it there. Thank you ever so much to you both. I really appreciate time. See you on the next KoitCast.
Very welcome.
Okay.
Right, bye-bye. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.